Section 26 of Tribal Custom in Anglo-Saxon Law. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tribal Custom in Anglo-Saxon Law by Frederic Seebohm. Chapter 11. Danish View of Anglo-Saxon Custom. 1. The De Institutis Londoniae of Knut. Having thus tried to obtain from the so-called laws of Henry I, whatever they may be, a Norman view of Anglo-Saxon custom, we recognize that on some points we may have learned more from this Norman view than could directly have been learned solely from the early Anglo-Saxon laws themselves. The reason of this is obvious. Special laws issued at various times by Saxon kings do not profess to cover the whole ground of existing and well-understood custom. Rather, should special laws be regarded as modifications of custom, made necessary at different periods by new circumstances. Thus, no one of the sets of laws can be expected to give a general view of custom as a whole. It is not strange, then, that we should owe some knowledge of early Anglo-Saxon custom to the Norman conquest, and the necessity after such an event to collect in a more connected and intelligible form what had formerly, to some extent, been matters of custom and tradition, and so it may be that our next chance of learning more may be found in the study of the documents and fragments belonging to the period of the Danish invasion of England, and especially the moment of transition from the English rule of Ethelred II to the Danish rule of Knut. The founding of the Danish kingdom of Knut was an epoch in English history, and indeed in the history of Europe. It was followed inter alia by the legislation in England of Scandinavian monetary reckoning in marks and ores, which had already for some time been in use side by side with the English reckoning in shillings and pounds, and this was typical of the general position of things, in full coincidence with the working of tribal feeling in other countries. Into the idea of conquest, the amalgamation of the two peoples into one did not enter. Danes continued to live under their laws, and the English under theirs, as Franks and Gallo-Romans did under Frankish rule. Certain things were enjoined upon both, but with a difference. It often happens that in documents of this period the law of the English is especially explained, while the Danish law is referred to as already known, thus revealing a Danish point of view. In the laws of Ethelred II, section 37, it is enacted that if anyone should be charged with plotting against the king, he must clear himself with the threefold ordeal by the law of the English, and by the law of the Danes according as their law may be. And so in the laws of Knut, penalties are stated as so many shillings by English law, and by Danish law as it formerly stood. So that, from the Danish point of view, it was sometimes a matter of inquiry and record what the English law had been, while knowledge of Danish law was mostly taken for granted. With regard to the coinage, this was only partly the case. Not that Anglo-Saxon reckoning in pounds and shillings was abolished, or that Danish currency was thenceforth the only one allowed, but Knut having styled himself King of all England and King of the Danes and Norwegians, London had become in one sense a Scandinavian port. The large sums paid to the army by Ethelred for respite and peace had flooded Scandinavia with English silver money of his coinage. This was so to such an extent that while the British Museum is rich in the coins of Ethelred, still more of them are to be found in Scandinavian museums, and one marked result of the increased intercourse with England was an increase also in the Scandinavian coinage, the type of which was chiefly taken from the coins of Ethelred II. London had become to some extent the commercial capital indirectly of what has been happily called the Greater Scandinavia. In the words of Mr. Keary, quote, "The Greater Scandinavia, with older countries, included, counting from the east to the west, a large district in the north and west of Russia, extending from Kiev to Lake Ladoga. It included Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and a strip of land in North Germany, Mecklenburg, northern England, Man, most of the western Scottish islands, the Orkneys and Shetlands, settlements in Ireland and colonies in the Faroes and Iceland, a stretch of territories inhabited by peoples closely allied in blood, in speech, and in customs." End quote. Was it likely, then, that Knut, in making London the commercial capital of his kingdom, should adopt the English monetary system unchanged, without regard to that in use in the north? Happily, in the document known as De Institutis Londoniae, we have an interesting glimpse into the conditions of the port of London, and in its final clause, definite reference to the legislation of the Danish currency. This document has hitherto been placed doubtfully under the reign of Ethelred II, with some others of about the same period, but there is no evidence to show that it should be so placed rather than under the reign of Knut. It exists only in Latin, and it contains no mention of Ethelred, while its final clause becomes intelligible only, I think, if regarded as enacted after the accession of Knut. We learn from the document that Aldersgate and Cripplegate were the two gates which had guards. Billingsgate, being on the river, was treated as a port. Boats on arrival paid toll according to size, smaller ones a halfpenny, boats with sails 1 penny, a ceol vel hucus, 4d. if it should lie there. Ships laden with wool paid 1 timber from their cargo. Those coming with fish to the bridge also paid toll. Men from Rouen, with wine or whale, paid 6 shillings per ship, and the 20th lump of the whale. Men of Flanders, Normandy, and France declared their cargoes and paid toll. Goods overland through Holland and Belgium were also examined and paid toll. Men of the Emperor who came in their ships were to be held worthy of the same good laws as our people, sicut nos. From this it would appear that a good deal of the trade from the Baltic was an overland trade and in Frankish hands. The men of the Emperor who were treated on equal terms with our people were probably the merchants whose successors ultimately established the Hanseatic towns, and 2 or 3 centuries later the Hanseatic League. The final clause is as follows, quote, Novem et ut monetarii pauciores sint, quam antea fuerint, in omni summo portu 3, et in omni alio portu sit unus monetarius, et illi habeant sub operarius suos in suo crimine, quod purum faciant et recti ponderis per eandam vitam quam prediximus, et ipsi qui portus custodiant efficiant per overhirnesam meam, ut omne pondus sit marcatum ad pondus, quo pecunia mea recipitur, et eorum singulum signatur ita, quod 15 ore libram faciant, et custodiant omnes monetam, sicut vos docere praecipio, praecepto, et omnes eligimus. And that there be fewer moneyers than there formerly were in every chief town, 3, and in every other town, let there be 1 moneyer, and let them have their sub-workers under their responsibility, so that they make pure money and of right weight under the penalties aforesaid. And let those who have charge of the towns secure under penalties that every weight shall be marked at the weight by which my money is received, and that each of them is so signed that 15 ores make a pound, and let all maintain the coinage in accordance with the orders we have chosen to enjoin upon you and all men." Unquote. This clause has already been alluded to in connection with the laws of the Brets and Scots. The ore of 16 pence in which the payments of those laws were to be made was the ore described in this clause, for the ore of 1/15 of the pound was the ore of 16 pence. The wording of the clause is very distinct. There were to be monetarii, mintmen, at the several mercantile centres, 1 at each lesser town, and at the chief towns 3, and every weight used by them was to be marked to the weight at which my money was received, and every one of the weights was to be marked so that 15 ores make a pound. The pound was no doubt the Frankish and English pound, which, since the time of Charlemagne and Offa, contained 7,680 wheat grains, and was divided according to English reckoning into 12 ounces of 640 wheat grains, or 20 pence of 32 wheat grains. The Danish ore of 1/15 part of the pound was therefore of 512 wheat grains, or 16 pence. And there is good reason to believe that this ore was the ore in general use in Scandinavian commerce. We have seen that The Scandinavian ore, like the Merovingian ounce, when reckoned in wheat grains, was the Roman ounce of 576 wheat grains, but that in actual weight it had sunk below the Roman standard. The ortug, or stater, had apparently in actual weight fallen back to the weight of the stater of the ancient Eastern or Merovingian standard, vide licet 8 to 18 grams, so that the ore or ounce of 3 ortugs of this weight would weigh 24 to 54 grams, and this was almost exactly 1/15 of the Anglo-Saxon pound. We may therefore with some confidence regard the ore legalized by Knut for commercial use as practically identical in weight of silver with the ore of 3 ortugs in use in the Baltic and generally in Scandinavian trade. Moreover, when we turn to the actual coinage of Knut, we find that by a sweeping change he reduced the weight of the silver penny from 1/20 of the Anglo-Saxon ounce to apparently 1/20 of this ore, intending, it would seem, to make his ore pass for payments as an ore of 20 pence instead of 16. When these facts are taken together, we can hardly, I think, be wrong in assigning the De Institutis Londoniae to the time of the foundation of the Danish kingdom by Knut, and in considering its final clause as recording the legalization of the Danish monetary system with its marks and ores for use in England and for purposes of international trade. The fact that the ore of 16 was in use not only in the laws of the Brets and Scots, but also in the Domesday Survey, for example, in the district between the Mersey and the Ribble, is a lasting proof of its use wherever Scandinavian conquest and commerce extended, possibly before and certainly long after it was legalized for English use by Knut. 2. Fragment of Grith and of Mund. Having gained from the De Institutis Londoniae some sense of the greatness of the change to England consequent upon the accession of Knut, and also of the importance of England to Knut's Scandinavian kingdom, we may now turn to the consideration of certain documents which seem to be attempts made during this period of change to realize and record what had been Anglo-Saxon custom. The first clauses of Knut's church laws refer to the maintenance of the rights of the church as to grith and frith. Because God's grith is of all griths the best, and next thereto the king's, it is very right that God's church grith within walls and a Christian king's hand grith stand equally inviolate, so that anyone infringing either shall forfeit land and life unless the king be merciful to him. A homicide within church walls was to be bottless unless the king granted life against full bot. In this case, the homicide must pay his full ware to Christ or the king, as the case might be, and so in-law himself to bot. Then the bot was to be the same as the king's muntprice of £5. These clauses seem to be taken from another document of this period, headed Of Church Grith, which is printed by Thorpe among the laws of Ethelred. Again, the laws decreed by Ethelred and his Feutan at Montague respecting frithbot commence with the decree that grith should stand henceforth as it originally stood in the days of his, the king's, forefathers, so that again ancient custom is confirmed rather than new law enacted. This decree of Montague relates not, like Knut's law, to the grith of the church, but to the grith of various assemblies or courts. Crimes committed within the grith or peace given by the king's own hand, that is, the king's hand grith of the other documents, is again botless. The grith which the ealdorman and the king's reeve give in the assembly of the 5 burghs, if broken, involves a bot of 1200 shillings. That given by a burgh assembly, 600, that by a wapentake, 100, that in an alehouse for a dead man, 6 half-marks, and for a living one, 12 ores. In a further clause, section 12, it is stated that in a king's suit, the deposit or wed was to be of 6 half-marks, in an earl's and bishop's of 12 ores, and in a thegns of 6 ores. Here both English and Danish currencies are used. The law is common to both peoples. The principle of the grith or frith is alike for both English and Danes, and it does not seem that Knut had any intention of altering what had been law in this respect under his English predecessor. In Section 3 of Knut's church laws, dealing with crimes less than homicide, he seems to treat the grith of his new law and the muntbreis of old law as practically the same thing. And this clause, according to the text of manuscript G, contains an interesting allusion to Kentish as well as other English law. Quote, "He fod ministers grithbreis is at bot wortham thingo by singus munde. These mid 5 pundum on Engla lages su on Sentlande et the muntbreis 5 punt the singse su threo sa arses su medemram ministers mit et 120 shilling. These be singres flete. Su zonegate lesan their little theodum sic su leger sto there sic mit 320 shillings, and felt Kiritian their legersko ne sic mit 30 shilling." The grithbreis of the chief minister in cases entitled to bot is according to the king's mund, that is £5 by English law, and in Kent for the muntbreis £5 to the king and 3 to the archbishop, and of a minster of the middle class 120 shillings, that is according to the king's wite, and of one yet less where there is little service, provided there be a burying place 60 shillings, and of a field church 30 shillings. End quote. Further, there is a separate document belonging to this period entitled Of Grith and of Munt, which seems to have been a careful statement of what formerly had been law among the English, the Kentish people, the South Angles, and the North Angles, respectively. It is too long to be quoted at length. It states again that God's grith is of all griths of the first importance, and next thereto the king's. Formerly among the English, when a man fled for his life to the king, the archbishop, or the atheling, he had 9 days' grith. If he sought a bishop or ealdorman, he had 7 days' grith. Then it goes on to state that in the law of the Kentish people, the king and the archbishop had a like and equally dear muntbreis, while the archbishop's property, according to Kentish law, was compensated for 11-fold and the king's 9-fold, though the muntbirt of Christ's church was the same as the king's. Next, the grith law of the South Angles is described. The king's muntbreis is stated again to be £5 by the law of the English, an archbishop and an aetheling's muntbreis £3, other bishops and an ealdorman's £2, and if anyone fight in the presence of an aetheling or archbishop, the bot was 150 shillings. If in that of another bishop or ealdorman, 100 shillings. Lastly, the document records that in the North Angles law, quote, "It stands that he who slays anyone within church walls shall be liable in his life, and he who wounds shall be liable in his hand, and let him who slays anyone within church doors give to the church 120 shillings, according to the North Angles law, and let a freeman who harms a living person in his muntbirt pay 30 shillings." End quote. In section 59 of the secular laws of Knut, under the heading of boarbreis, is a statement that if any one break the king's boar, the bot is £5, an archbishop's or aetheling's boar £3, a laird-bishop's or ealdorman's boar £2. This is a reenactment of clause 3 of King Alfred's dooms. In the latter, the words boarbreis and muntbirt appeared to be interchangeable. Both mean the breach of protection or munt. There is finally a fragment which fixes the extent of the king's grith to be 3 miles and 3 furlongs and 3 acre breadths, and 9 feet and 9 hand breadths, and 9 barleycorns from the burghet where the king is. Within this area the grith or protection of the king extends, and the use of the word grith seems to place this fragment among those belonging to the Danish group. In this grith or area of protection, taken together with the grith of various persons in regard to the duration of the protection, and the grith of the various assemblies or courts, and finally in the munt of various persons marked by the amount of the muntbreis, there is surely a foundation in ancient custom for the jurisdiction involved in the sack and sock of the later period. We have seen in the clauses of the so-called laws of Henry I allusion to the sack and sock of the lord on whose land a homicide has been perpetrated, and under whose jurisdiction the ved or pledge has been given for the payment of wergeld. According to earlier phraseology, the lord's grith or peace has been broken. He has a territorial jurisdiction over the giving of the ved by which it is to be restored, and he is entitled to fight accordingly. If his own man has been slain, whether on his own land or not, his mund has been broken, and the manbot of his man is payable to him. The phrase sock and sack is probably of Scandinavian origin. It does not seem to go back earlier than the time of Knut. It is not found in his laws. But the principle at the root of the grith and the mund was not one newly introduced at this period. We shall find it again in the earliest laws, and we have already found it at work under Irish custom. The Irish chieftain's precinct, or area of protection, extended on his green as far as he could throw his hammer, and the value of his protection varied, as we've seen, with his honour price. 3. The frith between Ethelred II and Olaf Tryggvason, Anno Domini 993. The real Danish invasion of England, which ended in the accession of Knut to the kingdom of all England, commenced with the arrival of Olaf Tryggvason, afterwards King of Norway, in Anno Domini 991. The fatal battle of Malden had been fought, and £10,000 of silver paid for a temporary peace. At length the treaty was made between Ethelred and Olaf, on the latter embracing Christianity. The article on homicide in this frithmal is the only one which need be quoted here. Quote, Gif Englishman Danishne avslä, freemen frigne, gelde heine mit 5 puntum of hon man fone han döden agefe, så då se daniska thone, engliskan swagif he heine avslä. Gif Englishman Danishne frel avslä gelde heine mit punde så daniska englishne swagif he heine avslä. If an Englishman slay a Dane, a freeman, let him pay for him with £25, or let the slayer be delivered up, and let the Dane do the same by an Englishman if he slay him. If an Englishman slay a Danish thrall, let him pay for him with £1, and so a Dane in like manner by an Englishman if he slay him. End quote. The points to be noted here are these. It is for the crime of a freeman slaying a freeman that the wergeld of £25 is to be paid, and this wergeld of £25 of silver is the wergeld of 1200 Wessex shillings, so that the freeman of this clause is the 12 hindemen. For the purpose of this frith between Ethelred and Olaf, the 12 hindemen, and not the 2 hindemen, is the typical freeman, and the Dane also is to be paid for by a 12 hindemen's wergeld. The 2 hindemen escapes without notice. No class is mentioned between the 12 hinde freeman and the thrall, whether Danish or English, is paid for with £1 of silver. Finally, the compact is described in Anglo-Saxon pounds, not in Danish marks and ores. It is an English statement of the frith between the English king and the army that Anlaf, Olaf, and Justin and Gutmund, Stegita's son, were with, and accordingly at the end of clause 7 is recorded the humiliating admission that £22,000 of gold and silver were given to the army in England for the frith. End of section 26. Read by Sandra, near Montreal, 2024.